The Salt Lake Temple now weighs more than 185 million pounds, and its entire weight has been transferred onto 98 enormous space isolators buried underneath it.
They put the whole temple on shock absorbers.
Yeah, basically. During a major earthquake, the building can now move as much as 5 feet in any direction instead of being torn apart by the ground moving underneath it.
It's incredible engineering.
It really is. Russell Nelson told members before his death last September that once the renovation is finished, there will be no safer place during an earthquake in the Salt Lake Valley than inside that temple.
Right. So when an earthquake hits and the temple survives, then
Well, yeah, the engineers will have done exactly what they designed the building to do. And like you, I suspect the story that members will tell will be, oh, a prophet saw it coming.
hello, Eternal Family. Welcome to Post-Mormon Postmortem's Mormon Monday, where we look at something happening in Mormondom and ask, what is going on here? So, Jess, what's going on here?
So on June 30th, 2026, the church announced that the Salt Lake Temple was officially resting on its new seismic isolation system. Over several days, workers removed more than 1,500 bolts from 392 steel plates connected to 98 base isolators, all of those sitting about 20 feet beneath the temple. Those plates had held the isolators still while the construction team transferred the weight of the building onto them. Once the plates were removed, the temple was free to move. One of the construction supervisors actually described it this way. He said, quote, "The temple is set free to move now during an earthquake," end quote. And that movement is the whole point. Instead of forcing a 185 million pound stone building to absorb the full motion of the ground, the isolators allow the structure to travel horizontally as much as 5 feet in any direction.
That is so actually wild. Like how you move a building. Well, you don't move a building. You put a building
Mhm.
onto a different foundation without moving the building. How
Yeah,
do you do that?
you do it very slowly and with an unbelievable amount of engineering. So they built a new concrete foundation around and beneath the existing stone foundation. Then they constructed enormous reinforced concrete transfer girders that redirect the temple's weight from the old foundation into new footings resting on the base isolators. So the foundation contains 263 miles of post tensioning cable. And then engineers drilled 46 vertical holes through the temple's towers and walls, and some of those holes run about 150 feet. They threaded bundles of steel cable through them, connected the cables to the reinforced structures at the top and the new foundation below, and tightened them to 500,000 pounds of tension. So that compresses the stone structure together so the walls and towers are less likely to pull apart during violent shaking. This isn't some like symbolic update where they just filled a few cracks and blessed the scaffolding. The Salt Lake Temple really went under a massive structural transformation.
Salt Lake City sits beside the Wasatch Fault Zone. A major earthquake there isn't a fringe possibility that somebody found in a obscure prepper forum. Nope, not just like a viable possibility. I mean, it's going to happen is the idea, right? A 2016 study by the Working Group on Utah Earthquake Probabilities estimated a 43% chance of at least one magnitude 6.7 or greater earthquake. So not just that there's a percent chance of an earthquake, this level of earthquake somewhere in the Wasatch Front during the study's forecast period from 2014 until 2063 is what they were estimating. The probability of at least one magnitude 6.0 or greater earthquake during that period was 57%. So, the Salt Lake City segment of the fault can produce an earthquake around magnitude 7. According to Utah's Geological Survey scenario, that could kill between 2,000 and 2,500 people and cause around 7,500 to 9,500 life threatening injuries. So, I mean, you think about the deaths, but then the injuries of
Yeah.
that's even more catastrophic because those are people who need to be attended to. Salt Lake County alone has more than 147,000 older brick buildings that are vulnerable to serious damage or collapse. Around 84,000 families could be displaced. Roads, water systems, hospitals, schools, power infrastructure, all of it would be affected. So the renovation isn't an unreasonable precaution.
No, reinforcing the temple was responsible. It's an enormous historic masonry building in an earthquake zone, and people will eventually be inside it again. The engineering is genuinely impressive. Seismically retrofitting a historic masonry building in a fault zone, it's not unusual. California does this constantly. So does New Zealand. So did Notre Dame's restoration team in Paris. But what's specific to this story isn't the retrofit, it's what gets said about it. The problem is going to come if the engineers disappear from the story and the building's survival gets presented as proof that Russell Nelson was a prophet, because the church has already started writing that version.
That's the version that's going to be told. Absolutely. Like you said, it already is. In October 2021, Russell Nelson gave a general conference talk called The Temple and Your Spiritual Foundation. The physical renovation became an object lesson about spiritual obedience. Never heard that, never seen that move
Mhm.
before. Nelson showed footage of the work beneath the Salt Lake Temple and said, "My dear brothers and sisters, when renovations on the Salt Lake Temple are completed, there will be no safer place during an earthquake in the Salt Lake Valley than inside that temple." Then he immediately moved from the physical building to temple covenants. Likewise, he said, whenever any kind of upheaval occurs in your life, the safest place to be spiritually is living inside your temple covenants, close quote. Yeah, we used to do this thing when we were kids where no matter what happened, we would shoehorn it into a gospel lesson. It would be like, oh, I just, whatever it was, right? Like the most obscure thing, it's like, somebody accidentally recorded it with my VHS tape, just like the gospel. We would make it work no matter what. So Nelson has said no safer place in Salt Lake Valley, and church publications have kept repeating that statement ever since.
Right. And Dale Renland, a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, gave an even more explicit version while explaining the base isolation project. He said that without the upgrade, a major earthquake would cause the temple to, quote, crumble and fall. And after the upgrade, he said, quote, the temple will withstand the seismic hit. So take note, members. You've already been given the before and after. Before Russell Nelson approved the renovation, the temple would fall. After Russell Nelson approved it, the temple would stand.
I mean, he's probably not wrong. It's just that engineering did it, right?
Right.
And I think I kind of understand how the steel, how the cables work. But if we can find a picture, I think that would make it much easier. So there's already been a smaller preview of how this story works. The Salt Lake Temple closed for renovation at the end of 2019. Then on March 18th, 2020, a magnitude 5.7 earthquake struck near Magna, Utah. The Salt Lake Temple sustained minor damage. Some of the smaller spire stones shifted and the trumpet fell out of Angel Moroni's statue's hand. I mean, that's pretty major.
That's
The
pretty major.
church's official statement said, "This event emphasizes why this project is so necessary to preserve this historic building and create a safer environment for all our patrons and visitors."
Later that year, Nelson used the earthquake in general conference. He said, quote, some question the need for taking such extraordinary measures. However, when the Salt Lake Valley suffered a 5.7 magnitude earthquake earlier this year, this venerable temple shook hard enough that the trumpet on the statue of the Angel Moroni fell. End quote. He turned the physical foundation into a lesson about faith, obedience, and preparing for, quote, metaphorical earthquakes. The renovation had been planned before the earthquake. The earthquake didn't reveal the danger to Nelson or inspire the project. Engineers had been studying the problem for years. But once the earthquake happened, it became part of the prophetic narrative. People had questioned the project. Then the earth shook, Moroni dropped his trumpet, and Nelson's decision looked prescient.
Exactly. The church currently displays the fallen trumpet in its Firm Foundation Children's exhibit. Children can learn about the earthquake, the temple renovation, and the importance of building their own lives on a strong spiritual foundation. So the engineering project has already become a faith promoting lesson.
The base isolation plan didn't originate with Russell Nelson. According to a statement from the church's newsroom, the proposal was presented to church leaders several times before Nelson approved it. Engineers, architects, and preservation specialists had been working on the problem for years. The June announcement said the project followed 2 decades of planning. The church's article describing that history is titled, Led by the Spirit, Divine Guidance and Prophetic Direction Have Guided Salt Lake Temple Renovations. That article explains that the plan was proposed a handful of times before Nelson agreed that the work was necessary and moved it forward with the approval of the 12. So, a proposal that gets pitched multiple times before a decision maker signs off isn't how the church describes revelation in other places. It's how any large institution approves a 9-figure capital project. The church's own account of the approval process reads like routine bureaucracy, but the title on that account is Led by the Spirit.
Yeah, because he was led by the Spirit to finally listen. So let's please pay attention to how credit is already being assigned. As you said, Jess, it was engineers who identified the problem and designed the system, and construction workers spent, 6 years physically building it. And it took roughly $2 billion in church funds that the church never publicly itemized. But $2 billion. It's a lot of money. Could do a lot
It's
with
a lot of
$2 billion.
money. Yeah.
But the official story places prophetic direction over the entire project, as it would. And someday, when the Wasatch Fault produces the earthquake everybody knows it will produce, those two stories will merge.
Yeah. So picture what would happen if a magnitude 7 earthquake hit Salt Lake City after the temple reopened. Houses would collapse and families would find themselves unhoused overnight. Schools, hospitals, and roads would be damaged. The estimate, as Hannah said, is that thousands of people would be injured or killed. But in the middle of the city, the Salt Lake Temple moves several feet on its isolators and remains standing. The footage would be immediate, right? There'd be drone shots of the damaged city with the temple rising above it. There'd be clips from Russell Nelson's 2021 conference talk. There will be no safer place during an earthquake in the Salt Lake Valley than inside that temple.
Yeah, definitely a dramatic voiceover with James Earl Jones, RIP. Members won't need the church to issue a statement declaring it a miracle, okay? They will make the video themselves. They will be posting on social media. The church's little PR army will say that Russell Nelson knew and prepared because he's a prophet, all right? And missionaries will already have the story about the modern prophet warning the world and preserving this iconic Mormon building. But the actual explanation will be sitting 20 feet underground. 98, did you say, Jess? Base isolators,
98.
transfer girders, reinforced concrete, and hundreds of miles of steel cable. A building designed to survive an earthquake may just survive an earthquake. That's what the engineers were hired to accomplish.
So let's be clear what we're criticizing here. I mean, the church should protect people inside the temple. It should preserve a historic building if it has the money and the technical ability to do it. This renovation may be one of the most ambitious seismic upgrades ever attempted on a masonry structure, and the people who designed and built it deserve all the credit in the world. What bothers me is the way Mormon storytelling can take a predictable result and then convert it into supernatural evidence. The temple is being strengthened because geologists have studied the fault and engineers understand how buildings fail. Its survival would come from planning, expertise, labor, and an extraordinary amount of money. Once that survival becomes a story about prophetic foresight, every human decision underneath it gets swallowed up by the miracle.
Mm. Yeah. Right on. Good explanation. There's also something quite gross about treating a standing temple as a missionary opportunity while the surrounding community is suffering. Because anyone who's been to Salt Lake City in the last, well, any time, will understand that if thousands of people died and tens of thousands of people lost their homes in a city where there is already the global south and the global north sitting side by side, the meaningful question won't be whether a heavily reinforced church building remains standing. It's like, what is a church going to do with all its money and resources and buildings and food and volunteers and enormous institutional capability to help everybody living in the rubble around it should this earthquake happen? The survival of the temple won't tell anyone whether Mormonism is true, but it would tell people about what the church values.
Indeed, it really would. So, Russell Nelson hasn't predicted that an earthquake will happen on a particular date.
No, unfortunately, no, that would be fun. He approved a major engineering project in a region with a well-documented earthquake risk.
But he was really careful to publicly attach his prophetic authority to the outcome before he died.
Exactly. He's already on the record. It's going to be the safest place in the valley. The church has framed the renovation as prophetic direction and has spent years turning the temple's physical foundation into a lesson about being obedient, following the prophets, and keeping your temple covenants. If the big one comes and the Salt Lake Temple survives, we already know what people will say. They will call it a miracle. And we hope that the miracle story will not leave out those heroic 98 base isolators underneath it. And that is all we have for today's Mormon Monday.
It is. If you liked this story, we'd love it if you tell us about it in the comments. We'd also appreciate hitting that subscribe button, and a rating helps us out. A 5-star rating takes like 3 seconds. But we do appreciate everyone being here, and we'll be back next week with another interesting story about something going on in the land of Mormondom. And Hannah, before we go,
Yes,
so
Jeff.
sorry for what I said when I was Mormon.
I too am sorry for what I said when I was Mormon.